through all the legends of ancient peoples, Assyrian, Babylonian, Sumerican, Semitic, runs the saga of the eternal man, the one who never dies, called by various names in various times, but historically known as Gilgamesh, the man who has never tasted death, the hero who strides through the centuries.
Describe yourself as working class. Sakir, define working class.
No, working class is families that work for their living, earn their money through going out to work every day, not through other means.
Middle classes do that?
Well, working class families have the ordinary hope to get on in life.
Whoa, this channel's been inactive for a while, hasn't it? But in my defense, my wife was raped and my child beheaded. So I've had a lot on my plate, guys, alright? Well, you don't believe me? Have you been burnt before?
To kill, to rape, to behead babies.
We behead babies.
Babies being beheaded.
Ask yourself this, though. What kind of sick individual would make something like that up, eh? You'd have to be as sick as Jacob Rees-Mogg. That's pretty sick, isn't it? And that's what you're accusing me of being. Well, though I feel it's really insulting to me that I would have to prove any of this to you, luckily, I sent photographic evidence to the President of the United States and leader of the free world, Joe Biden, who helpfully for me then publicly stated that he'd seen the pictures of my beheaded child. So no one can be in any doubt unless you think Joe Biden, President of the United States, leader of the free world, would lie about something as serious as that, which is that's a pretty damning indictment of Joe Biden. If you think he's going to lie about beheaded children. Oh, you don't think he's lying? You think he's just off his trolley? Well, unfortunately, that can't be the case, because this was 6 months ago when Joe Biden was most definitely on his trolley, because this was before he'd officially announced he was rerunning for the presidency. So he must have been on. I mean, they wouldn't have let him run, right, if he was off his trolley at that point, would they? Unless what you're saying is that they deliberately let him run, even though they knew he was off his trolley, because as incumbent, they knew he would easily win the primaries and push everyone else out of the race, allowing them then to get rid of Biden later, once the primaries were done and dusted, and install Harris, of course, who would never absolutely had no chance of winning if there had been any actual democratic process. Now that sounds like a pretty dastardly conspiracy theory to me. And we know it isn't true because Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, met with the president in July and said he was sharper than he's ever been on the same day that he introduced Zelensky as Putin. But I think the important thing to note here is it doesn't have to be a conspiracy theory, right? It doesn't have to be a planned strategy to install Harris. It just has to be a kind of sort of collective will that they don't want the primaries to be hijacked by the democratic will of democratic voters. They want to keep Biden, ideally, and failing that, they want to keep control, even if they don't fully consciously understand that. And so you get past the primaries, and suddenly there's less incentive to back Biden because if they get rid of Biden now, they can install whoever they want. So suddenly it's like, oh, actually, maybe Biden isn't quite as on the ball as we thought he was. Oh, maybe we should get rid of him, actually. I'm suddenly coming around to the idea. It's interesting, though, that despite not being deemed capable of running for president, Joe Biden is still the president. You would think if there was one person in the entire world that you could safely assume would have the physical and mental capabilities to run for president, it would be the president. Anyway, getting back to rape and beheaded babies, despite an overwhelming lack of evidence, there's a feeling, something in the air, that women were raped and babies were beheaded on October 7th. There's no evidence, but there is an ambience.
Slaughtered and raped and burned. Raping, killing, burning, cutting the bellies of pregnant women.
And that's all well and good, but what's interesting is that at the same time, there's, well, no feelings at all, for the actual rape and torture of actual Palestinians and the thousands of actual babies that have been killed. Which is similar to how there's a feeling that the pro-Palestinian protesters who have been peacefully demonstrating for an end to the bombing of civilians and for a ceasefire are actually dangerous thugs. And even though many of them are actually Jewish, they're all actually anti-Semitic. Which is similar to how there's a feeling that the protest camps that popped up at universities around the country are a hostile entity that makes many students feel unsafe. While in reality, actual gangs and the actual police physically attacked the students in the camps. Which is similar to how in the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, there was a feeling that the party was a danger to right-wing Jewish and non-Jewish members who supported the State of Israel, while in reality the party was actually expelling long-time left-wing Jewish members who were unsupportive of the State of Israel. One of the big problems, of course, when discussing anything to do with Israel, is that some misguided people hold Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the State of Israel, which is, as I'm sure you're well aware, listed on the IHRA's working definition of antisemitism as antisemitism. And the IHRA is the only definition of antisemitism that this channel subscribes to. If you love the IHRA, why don't you hit that like button and subscribe? But who would associate the good Jewish people of the world with the dastardly crimes of Israel? Who would do such a thing? Why? It's the current Labour leadership and all your favourite liberal commentators, of course, because you see, Israel is a Jewish state. It's the Jewish state.
The first duty of Israel is to protect the Jewish people.
A nation for Jews, by Jews. And it exists for and represents all Jews around the world. And the actions it takes are on behalf of Jews. And any attack on Israel is an attack on the Jews. And any criticism of Israel is motivated by anti-Semitism, which is, of course, a hatred of Jews. But I tell you one thing Israel isn't. That's a Jewish ethno-state. I mean, don't you understand? Israel is a diverse, multicultural society. So calling it a Jewish ethno-state is very insulting because of the inaccuracy. And also because it's anti-Semitic somehow, even though it's not to do with Jewish. It's like the whole Nazi thing, right? You can compare the actions of Hamas to Nazis all day long, like this guy does.
And who is now fighting the Nazis of the 21st century in the way that the UK fought against Hitler? And I don't remember the UK worried about the population of Dresden. Let me remind you that Hitler was in a bunker. And he was surrounded with people.
Hamas
and you could ask,
denies...
how do you know that Hitler is in the bunker?
But if you dare make any allusions whatsoever to the actions of Israel resembling the Nazis, that would be anti-Semitic, wouldn't it? Why? Well, it would be if you equate the actions of the Israeli state with Jewish people, but that itself is anti-Semitic. Of course, it's true that the vast majority of Zionists around the world are indeed evangelical Christians. But Zionists are in fact a highly diverse group of people. There's Roman Catholics, Hindus, even Muslims, not to mention atheists, and of course just straight up anti-Semites. So you see, it's a rich tapestry.
Listen, let me tell you something, yeah? If there was a war tomorrow, which there will be, because I'll probably start at the end of the session, if there was a war and it kicked off, I would be there on the front line fighting for Israel.
Say what you want about Tommy Robinson, the man knows his politics. Another big issue, I think we can all agree on, is media bias.
One note of caution, always be careful. It's important to check all the sources. They might not be giving you the full picture, or they might have made, an innocent mistake. So you need to be careful. Only use those sources that you trust.
Now, many Israeli spokespeople have complained, quite rightly, that the media has become increasingly hostile towards the Israeli government's framing of the war. Or you could say they've started challenging Netanyahu talking points. And so, quite understandably, Israeli spokespeople say, hang on guys, why do you never push back against Hamas propaganda? Where's the balance? I thought the BBC was all about balance. And of course it's true, the BBC don't push back on Hamas propaganda. But the main reason for that is because in order to do so, the BBC would first have to actually report what Hamas's propaganda is. So, just for the sake of balance, here's some pro-Hamas propaganda. On October the 6th, a Palestinian was killed by the Israeli military. Israel, by the way, has been accused by numerous human rights organizations of doing apartheid, which I think is something you should always mention when Israel, which has been accused by numerous human rights organizations of doing apartheid, comes up. In retaliation for the killing of this guy on October the 6th, and actually, come to think of it, the 200 other Palestinians killed in Gaza in 2023 before October the 6th, which is also worth noting before October the 7th, by the Israeli forces, which incidentally has been accused by numerous human rights organizations of doing apartheid, the completely legitimate and real Palestinian state military force, which, by the way, under international law has legal right to self-defense and armed resistance against the Israeli occupation of Gaza. Israel incidentally has been accused by numerous human rights organizations of doing apartheid, launched a strategic and defensive hand glider operation on October the 7th. Now, it is a great tragedy that some Israeli citizens died on that day, but self-defense, 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 and actually, the brutal, heartless Israeli military killed a lot of its own citizens on that day. Maybe the majority. Maybe all of them. I wouldn't put it past them, would you? I mean, the Israeli regime, which has been accused of apartheid by numerous human rights organizations, can be pretty brutal towards its own public. Look at these images here of the Israeli police beating up Israeli citizens, Jewish citizens, and not even those casual half-assed Jews like David Baddiel. No, these are the super Jewish ones with the hats and everything. I mean, David Baddiel doesn't even go to shul. In fact, Judaism for David Baddiel has become a purely cultural thing around a bowl of chicken soup. And if you think that sounds anti-Semitic, well, you'd be wrong, because that's a quote from Luke Akehurst, the newly elected Labour MP for North Durham, describing Jews who don't support Israel. And the video in which he said that was circulated widely during the election, and we know the Labour Party under Keir Starmer has zero tolerance for anti-Semitism. So, either it's not anti-Semitic to say that about Jewish people, or it's not anti-Semitic when directed at non-Zionist Jews, because non-Zionist Jews aren't really Jewish. That would be the logic, right? You can't be anti-Semitic towards non-Zionist Jews because they're not Jews. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's a bit like, just off the top of my head, how Hitler didn't consider Jews to be human. So gassing them wasn't really murder. Now, obviously, Hamas would love the opportunity to precision bomb Netanyahu's house. Who wouldn't? But unfortunately, the US of A, that international pariah, which perennially trammels the UN, and unlike almost every other country in the world, doesn't recognize the Palestinian state, nor is a member of the Rome Statute, basically a freak nation, the US of A, refuses to send Hamas the sophisticated weaponry or indeed the financial support needed to acquire the sort of sophisticated weaponry that it regularly supplies to Israel, which, it may surprise you to learn, has been accused by numerous human rights organizations of doing apartheid. Now, the Israeli regime, including its prime minister, have spoken repeatedly about wiping out the population of Gaza. And so surely you would agree that Hamas has a duty to defend the Palestinian people. And sadly, regrettably, unfortunately, tragically, sometimes, on occasion, this results in the deaths of teenagers at festivals. But that's war. That's war, isn't it? It's war. Do you remember Dresden? Do you? So anyway, that's enough of that disgusting Hamas propaganda, for now anyway. But you can see, right? You can see how this kind of wacky framing, it's pretty disgusting. Yeah, it's pretty horrendous stuff. I mean, imagine if the media were to actually air this kind of deranged Hamas propaganda. It would be, dare I say it, offensive. Offensive to your intelligence, I would hope. Luckily, though, the BBC don't do that for Hamas. Actually, let's do a little bit more Hamas propaganda. So how about this? Israel, which, and this might shock you to learn, has been accused by numerous human rights organizations of doing apartheid and killing numerous journalists. Let's just throw that one in as well. Israel is arguably nothing more than a military outpost of American empire, which uses the narrative of Zionism, the fear-mongering of Jewish persecution around the world, to manipulate Jewish people, ironic, into leaving the place they were born, the place they belong, and moving to, well, let's call it what it is, British Palestine. I mean, I never agreed to letting it go. So Jews have been tricked by those crafty Americans to act as unwitting human shields for strategically placed US-controlled military infrastructure. So it's America's fault that Jewish people end up being killed in the region. Food for thought, eh? Actually, forget about that and get a load of this. Zionism is an extremist ideology akin to, say, Islamism, and in particular ISIS, the terrorist organization that is currently attempting to create an Islamic State, which is a state for Islamists by Islamists, in Gaza. Who'd have thunk it? So ISIS, through force, are trying to take land, or annex, if you will, very similar to the Jewish state, or JS, or as some people are calling it, JISIS. By the way, here's a pro tip. If you want to say something completely insane on the internet, but don't want to take any responsibility for it, just do what the BBC do and throw in the phrase, some people are saying that Hamas are really cool guys, handsome, well-dressed, high in conscientiousness. Not me, of course. I'm just a humble reporter. I'm just reporting what I've heard. Some people are saying in a just world, Keir Starmer would have his head smashed in with a hammer. What do you think? Obviously, I would never say that. I'm against violence. Not only for moral reasons, but also because I'm frankly terrified of it. I'm both a pacifist and a wuss. Anyway, back to JISIS. JISIS is a Jewish fundamentalist movement with an extremist ideology that has been slowly seizing territory in the region of British Palestine for decades. The British Palestinian community, a community of Palestinian families just communing in a commune of communion, have been bravely attempting to contain the extremist, fundamentalist, terrorist threat of JISIS. Just good, God-fearing Muslim families who, along with their friendly neighbours and allies in the region, have been working together to defeat the external force of evil that not only threatens the way of life of Palestinian Muslims, but also Palestinian Jews as well. Yeah, that's right. Because although some would argue, by some I mean racists like the UK Labour Party, that the Zionist militants represent Jewish values, and in fact the violent nature of JISIS is somehow intrinsically linked to Judaism and its teachings, this is not the case, okay? Judaism is a peaceful religion. The vast majority of Jewish people live just like you and I, miserably. However, even though JISIS has nothing to do with Judaism, the Zionist death cult of JISIS is embedded, unfortunately, in a lot of Jewish organizations, and often it is disenchanted, vulnerable Jewish people, usually boomers, who are susceptible to its propaganda online and in the community. And so sadly, you will often hear of British folk being radicalized through online forums, religious newspapers and talk radio to leave their relatively safe middle-class lives in North London and travel to the Middle East to kill Muslim children. So it's imperative any institution or individual that supports Israel, you should report them to prevent for their extremist ideology. Now that really would be a crazy framing and pretty offensive. But as I say, thankfully, the BBC don't push that kind of insane propaganda for Hamas. So anyway, Keir Starmer, the Stannis Baratheon of UK politics, has become Prime Minister. 2 months already. How time has flown by. But how's it going? How is the UK doing under its new Prime Minister? Well, I think it's only fair that we hear from the man himself. What are his thoughts? Things are worse than we ever imagined. Refreshingly frank response there from the UK Prime Minister. Now, back in July 2022, after visiting the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, Keir Starmer tweeted this.
We must always remember the millions of Jewish people who were murdered and persecuted because of who they were.
This is my Keir Starmer impression. If you're in any doubt, I've been working on it all summer. Frankly, I think it was time well spent.
Labour remains committed to learning from the world's darkest days.
You've also got to get some scoffs in there. Keir Starmer does like to scoff. He won't be scoffing when someone puts a hammer in his head, some people are saying. He also made a video. Starmer does love his videos.
And here at the headquarters of the SPD, our sister party, we're talking to them about their election success and their core message to their electorate, which was all about respect. I think an incoming Labour government should have a contract with the British public based on security, prosperity and respect. So those are the discussions we're having to ensure that we can follow in the footsteps of the SPD and win that election, that general election in the United Kingdom, whenever it may come.
But the interesting thing is that in response to this, the CAA, Campaign Against Antisemitism, posted this on Twitter. It's a matter of decency and long-established convention in Germany that you never stoop to using the Berlin Holocaust Memorial as some kind of a prop, but to incorporate the memorial in the backdrop for a political clip that does not even mention the Holocaust is an insult. This is especially so for a political party that itself still has serious problems with anti-Semitism in its ranks. Exploiting a visit to the Holocaust Memorial like this for campaigning purposes is not just tasteless, it is manipulative and repulsive. Our most recent polling found that 81% of British Jews feel that anti-Semitism is still inadequately addressed under Sir Keir Starmer. Many feel that attempts to tackle racism against Jews in the Labour Party has been more of a public relations effort than anything of substance. This offensively crass PR video will do little to dispel that impression. Now, if you don't know about the CAA, they were the guys that created those snazzy-looking mobile billboards during the 2019 election. Just in time. In the nick of time, they did that. And in general, the CAA were very helpful, at least in the early days, in calling out all the very real anti-Semitism in the Labour Party under Corbyn. And if you remember, there was a lot of controversy about the Corbyn leadership and a lot of Labour members being very dismissive of the issue. Can you see where this is going? It's also worth mentioning that the CAA were one of the organisations that submitted complaints to the EHRC, thus prompting the EHRC's investigation into the Labour Party and the subsequent report, the very damning report, that everybody was jizzing over back in October 2020. And of course it goes without saying that Starmer has repeatedly claimed that his main goal, number one goal, when it came to changing the Labour Party, was to root out anti-Semitism by its roots. And obviously, we're all rooting for him. So you would imagine, under those circumstances, with that history, that Starmer and his flunkies would be very sensitive to any criticisms of anti-Semitism from the CAA. You would imagine that, wouldn't you? And yet, Margaret Hodge, who, back in the day during Corbyn's leadership, was a patron of the CAA when it was submitting complaints for anti-Semitism to the HRC, gave this response on Twitter to the CAA's complaints about Starmer. Keir Starmer visited the Holocaust Memorial on a trip to Berlin. Totally appropriate. I'm fed up of CAA using anti-Semitism as a front to attack Labour. Time to call them out for what and who they really are. More concerned with undermining Labour than rooting out anti-Semitism. What on earth is Margaret Hodge talking about here? Because it seems as if Hodge is accusing the CIA of weaponizing anti-Semitism, using it as a political weapon to undermine the Labour leadership. Now that is a crazy notion, and it's certainly the first I've heard about it. But what's also interesting is that she says she's fed up of it, which implies that it's been going on for a while. And I want to know how long exactly has this weaponization of anti-Semitism been going on? In Hodge's mind, when do you think the weaponization started? Because I've got a feeling that it probably started the moment Margaret Hodge's factional opponent Jeremy Corbyn stepped down as leader of the party and her factional ally Keir Starmer became leader. I think that day, that was the day the weaponization of anti-Semitism began. And all allegations of anti-Semitism before that day are completely true and real, and all allegations afterwards are just cynical attacks. But I don't know about this weaponization of anti-Semitism, because if the Labour Party isn't anti-Semitic, then what the hell is? I mean, next you're going to be telling me that the 500,000 protesters in central London aren't anti-Semitic, or the UN isn't anti-Semitic.
The UN Human Rights Chief urging an investigation into high-impact explosive weapon use by Israel. And we had the UN Secretary General, actually, Major General, saying that the high number of civilian casualties shows that Israel's strategy, there is something seriously wrong with Israel's strategy. What do you make of these comments?
These comments are anti-Semite.
I mean, are you really saying the ICJ isn't anti-Semitic? The Green Party isn't anti-Semitic? James O'Brien isn't anti-Semitic? Gary Lineker isn't anti-Semitic? Reginald D. Hunter? The BBC? I mean, come on. Actually, there was a great article in The Guardian on this. BBC accused of gaslighting Jewish staff over anti-Semitism complaints. The BBC has been accused of gaslighting a group of more than 200 of its Jewish staff, contributors and suppliers over the handling of detailed complaints about anti-Semitism at the corporation. The group's complaints include a letter to the BBC chair, Samir Shah, calling for an investigation into what it warned could amount to a serious institutional racism problem. Yes, institutional racism at the BBC. But the thing is that it's the response of the BBC to the complaints. That's the real issue, yeah? They're not responding to it in the right manner, which in itself is the problem. The correspondence, first reported by Deadline and published by Variety, cited social media posts on the Israel-Gaza conflict, including those by the Match of the Day presenter Gary Lineker. The Apprentice contestant, I mean, how can the BBC be responsible for people that are contestants on their shit? Like other correspondence, including a 30-page dossier of anonymous complaints, yeah, of course, anonymous, from staff about their experiences of anti-Semitism at the BBC. In a reply sent last week, Shah expressed great concern about the allegations and referred the letter writers to the BBC's formal routes for making complaints. He added, "I am satisfied that where we have made errors, the executive have acted appropriately and handled matters in accordance to the guidelines as they apply to my colleagues." What a ridiculous response. And as you can imagine, the response has been met by anger from some of the signatories. Leo Pearlman, who runs the production company Fulwell 73, accused the BBC of treating Jews with disdain. Can we have some evidence for this? Speaking to the Jewish Chronicle, yes, of course, the Jewish Chronicle, that's where you go for serious debate on this issue. He said the response, again, it's the response to the complaint. What are the actual complaints? The response, nothing to see here, not even worthy of an investigation, is gaslighting by every definition. Well, maybe. I guess it depends on the complaints. The former Panorama producer Neil Gant, now Neil Gant, you may know, worked with John Ware on the BBC produced, actually, Panorama episode about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And the BBC were like, oh, we're doing lots of good work here, exposing the Labour Party's anti-Semitism. Let's all give ourselves a pat on the back. Little did they know, it was only the beginning. The former Panorama producer Neil Gant told the paper, when we present compelling evidence of the BBC's institutionalised anti-Semitism signed by over 200 colleagues, we expect to be listened to and not gaslit, especially by the BBC board, who won't even formally discuss our concerns. The row heaps more pressure on the BBC, which is already under fire over accusations of abuse on Strictly Come Dancing. What has this got to do with anything? And the management's failure to sack the news presenter Hugh Edwards, because he's a pedo fucking nonce. So I heard somewhere that using the P word on YouTube can lead to some algorithm interference. Although the fact that I said rape and beheaded child 2 minutes into this video probably means that it won't make a great deal of difference. Also, it's interesting how swearing is pretty much by the by these days. But on all these platforms, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, new taboo words have come about. So there's the R word, there's the other R word, seemingly there's the P word, of course there's the N word, and a bunch of other slurs that are a bit of a grey area. And I've not seen this written about or talked about anywhere, but I do think it's interesting that as a society, we have to have some taboo words. And so it seems as soon as we ditched the old ones, we suddenly acquired these new ones. And maybe there's something to be said about the fact that swearing or swear words comes out of religion, maybe. And using them in public, I guess, was like used to be a kind of subversive act, kind of anti-establishment with a vaguely left-wing feel to it. Whereas the new taboo words seemingly come from the left, and therefore to be subversive, to push against language policing would now be right-wing coded. I don't know, I think there's something interesting there. A spokesperson for the BBC said, "It is a great concern to us if anyone does not feel supported at work, and we have well-established and robust processes in place to handle any concerns or complaints raised with us confidentially." Well, clearly not. People are very unhappy that you're not dealing with these complaints, these really serious complaints that I'm sure we will be told what they are very soon. We have highlighted these to the signatories of the letter. As an organisation, we stand united against any form of abuse, prejudice, or intolerance. They said action had been taken when impartiality standards had been breached. Impartiality standards? I don't know what that's got to do with fucking racism, anti-Semitism. Lineker deleted a post he had retweeted by the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. A source said he had misread the original post. Finally, we're getting to something. Let's have a look at this then. Gary Lineker said he received threats after he retweeted, then deleted a post by the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel that called for Israel to be banned from international sporting events, including football. Why not? Why not ban Israel? Ban Russia? Why not ban Israel? A source has said he misread the post as a statement saying that the ban had been enacted. So he tweeted something about a boycott on Israel, and this is being used as evidence of institutionalized anti-Semitism at the BBC. It seems like someone is conflating criticism of Israel with criticism of Jewish people, which is anti-Semitic, isn't it? So the real anti-Semitism at the BBC are the people complaining about anti-Semitism. Anyway, the BBC may or may not be anti-Semitic. Who am I to say? But the one thing it definitely isn't is Islamophobic. Nor is the Labour Party, or Tory Party, or any UK institution or media organisation. Because if the UK media was Islamophobic, it would be reported in the media, wouldn't it? Since Starmer became leader of the Labour Party, more Jewish Labour members have been suspended than at any other time in the party's history. And during the election campaign that's just gone, it was revealed that Starmer had been lying for about a year about the conclusion to an investigation into the MP Diane Abbott, telling both Abbott and the public that the investigation was ongoing, when in fact it had concluded months ago, which of course is intervening massively in an investigation into anti-Semitism, which of course goes directly against the EHRC's damning report. But perversely, Starmer is widely reported to have been successfully tackling the anti-Semitism problem. So again, you've got the facts, that suggests Starmer is fucking horrendous, and the feeling that Starmer's doing a good job, he's doing his best. Now, I guess you could argue that non-Zionist Jews don't really count as Jews, and so kicking them out of the party isn't really anti-Semitic, which is similar to how Hitler... Anyway, this is also similar to how there's a feeling that Starmer's reinvention of the Labour Party is a kind of tribute act to David Cameron's austerity-driven 2010 Tory party is extremely popular with the electorate. Yeah, look at the massive majority they won. But of course, in reality, that's absurd. Now, after the election, there was a lot of talk about how Labour's vote share was actually down on 2017 when Labour lost. You remember, under Jeremy Corbyn. And in fact, it was only up by a meagre 2% on the disastrous result of 2019 under Corbyn, if you remember. But I think what's really crazy is because turnout in general was way down, Labour's vote count was lower than in both 2017 and 2019. So even though in terms of seats won, 2024 was Labour's third best result ever, I think, and 2019, as we're constantly reminded, was the worst result for Labour since 1935. At the same time, fewer voters actually voted for Labour for a Labour government in 2024 than voted for a Labour government in 2019 under Corbyn, if you remember. But hey, that's politics, baby. If you don't like it, get out there and vote for something. Well, actually, no, don't vote for. That's not going to work, but. So when riots erupted up and down the country the other week, a lot of people were confused and worried. Some were happy, others were angry, some were entertained, others scared. As for me, though, my thoughts turned immediately to the question, how can all this be blamed on Keir Starmer? Because you see, I'm a pro, yeah? I'm not messing around here. I see all the young pretenders on TikTok trying to take the crown, dishing out political hot takes like their Pfizer contract to Brussels. But Cope is back, baby. This channel is back. I'm not going to let the raping of my wife and beheading of my child stop me from talking about the truth. You know that joke about raping and beheading babies? I didn't want to make that joke, but I had to make a tough choice. We're not going to shy away from tough choices. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, this channel is back. And if you want to support this channel, why not become a patron? Why not become a patron for a channel which primarily doesn't make videos, a channel that primarily doesn't do anything? Why not sponsor that? I mean, I realize at this point that bringing up the Patreon is more likely to remind people who are already patrons to cancel their membership, which I'm surprised they haven't. Kind of amazed, really. So what have we learnt through all this? Well, I've learnt that making a video is even more effort than I remembered. And so that's why this is a half-finished mess. And it's really a shame because the plan was to connect all the things touched on in this part with some other stuff and then to bring it all together in some way. And that would have been an amazing video, right? In theory. And so we can only hope one day such a video is made. But I guess only time will tell.